Chapter 61. To the physical world. Morning hit the motel windows, casting a warm glow over the room. Damon turned, hearing the curtains open with a soft rustle. He opened his eyes, squinting slightly at the bright light. "Morning, Mom," he said, sitting up in bed. He raised his hand to rub his eyes, then paused mid-air, remembering that he wasn't exactly fully recovered. It had been a few days since the fight, and Damon wasn't feeling well. He had been looking forward to opening his new punching bag, but he had held off, to recover. Aoife answered, "Morning, Damon," her voice warm and gentle. She turned around, looking at Damon, and forced a smile after glancing at his bruised body. Her eyes lingered on the purple marks on his face and the bandages on his hands. Damon sat up, stretching his hand, trying to play it cool. "You're up early," he joked, attempting to hide the pain he felt. Aoife scoffed. "More like you're up late," she said with a smirk, moving away from the curtains. Her long, dark hair swayed behind her as she walked towards the small kitchenette in the motel room. Damon swung his legs over the side of the bed, feeling the soft carpet beneath his feet. He stood up slowly, stretching his arms over his head and arching his back. His muscles protested with a dull ache, but he ignored it, knowing it was just part of the healing process. Aoife turned around, watching him with a concerned expression. "You should be resting, Damon," she said, her voice firm but gentle. Damon shrugged, trying to downplay his injuries. "I'm fine, Mom. Just a few bruises," he said, attempting to smile. Aoife raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. "A few bruises," she repeated, and said with sarcasm evident in her voice. "You look like you've been through a war." So he finished up, cleaning up the bathroom, making sure to wipe down the sink and toilet, and then went out to the parking lot. The bright sunlight hit him like a slap in the face, making him squint. He raised a hand to shield his eyes, feeling the warm rays on his skin. The parking lot was empty, except for a few cars scattered here and there. Damon's eyes scanned the area, taking in the familiar sights. Damon looked around, scanning the empty parking lot. He was about to open his system interface, but then paused, thinking better of it. That would be reckless, he thought. What if someone was watching him, observing his every move? He couldn't afford to have his secret revealed, not now, not ever. Damon took a careful look around. No movement, no people. He felt a sense of caution, realizing how easily he could make a mistake. He decided against using the system here. It wasn't safe. Instead, he made up his mind to go for a run. It was a better way to clear his head and keep up with his training. He'll also just access the inventory right around the corner. He took a deep breath and started jogging, leaving the parking lot behind. Damon arrived around the corner, making sure he was alone. He glanced around cautiously, his eyes scanning the empty street. Satisfied that no one was watching, he opened the system interface. The familiar screen flickered to life, displaying his inventory. Damon's eyes landed on the punching bag icon, and he clicked on it. The description popped up, and he read through it quickly. Bag of steel, a sturdy, oversized punching bag designed for intense training. He could use it for low kicks, practicing his technique and building his strength. Damon's fingers hovered over the button, ready to bring the bag into the physical world. As he hesitated, he thought about the perfect spot to set up the bag. With a decisive nod, Damon clicked the button. The system interface flashed, and the punching bag materialized in front of him. It was bigger than he expected. Damon cracked his knuckles, a fierce grin spreading across his face. It was time to put in the work, to push himself to the limit. Chapter 62. Testing out my punching bag. Damon stood in front of a sturdy tree, and a black and blue punching bag hung from a branch. The bag swayed gently in the breeze, its surface reflecting the sunlight filtering through the leaves. He reached out to shake the bag, testing its stability, but the moment he did, a loud crack split the air. The branch creaked and groaned, its fibers snapping under the weight of the bag. Damon's eyes widened as he instinctively reached out to grab the bag, his hands wrapping around it to hold it in place. The branch fell, its splintered end scraping against his arm, leaving a faint scratch. He sighed, feeling a mix of frustration and disappointment. He had been looking forward to training with the new bag, and now he would have to find a new spot to hang it. He looked around, taking in the surroundings, searching for a new tree with a sturdier branch. Damon's eyes landed on a nearby tree, its branches thicker and more robust. He walked towards it, the punching bag still clutched in his hands. He examined the branches, searching for the perfect spot to hang the bag. His fingers traced the grooves and knots on the tree's surface, feeling for any weaknesses. Damon climbed the tree, his hands gripping the rough bark as he ascended higher. He reached a sturdy branch and grasped it firmly, pulling himself up to do a few pull-ups. His muscles flexed as he lifted his body. He dropped down, his feet thudding against the trunk, and smiled, satisfied with the branch's sturdiness. He hooked the punching bag to the branch, pulling the chain as he wrapped around the tree, then hooked the chain on itself. He stepped back, admiring his handiwork, and let out a laugh. "It's time to break this thing," he said, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. The punching bag swayed gently in the breeze, its surface reflecting the sunlight filtering through the leaves. Damon's eyes fixed on the bag, his mind focused on the upcoming training session. He cracked his knuckles, feeling the familiar surge of energy and determination. Damon picked up the plastic wrapping that covered his MMA gloves, the crinkling sound filling the air as he pulled them out. He had received these gloves from the system when he first got it, and they still looked brand new, despite the fights they had been through. He slipped his hands into the gloves, feeling the soft, padded interior envelop his fingers. The gloves fit snugly, providing a comfortable grip. Ignoring the sting of disappointment, Damon stepped forward again, this time throwing a powerful straight punch. Thud. The bag swung back, and Damon could feel the strain in his arms and legs. He was tired, but it was the kind of tired that told him he was pushing his limits. Finally, he stopped, breathing hard. The bag swayed slowly, the chains creaking above. Damon wiped his face with the back of his hand, taking a moment to catch his breath. He'd botched the kick, sure, but that was just one step in the process. Damon burst out laughing, the sound echoing through the air as he thought about the proficiency feature. He wanted to master all of his moves, and the thought filled him with excitement. He took a step back, bouncing around on the balls of his feet, his eyes fixed on the punching bag. He continued training, imagining himself in a real fight. He pictured his opponent in front of him, their fists flying towards him. Damon dodged and weaved, his gloved hands punching the bag with precision and power. He kicked and elbowed, his movements swift and deadly. Oh, how he wished the bag could punch back, giving him a true test of his skills. But he didn't let that stop him. He kept pushing himself. Especially, he focused on the question mark kick. He had missed it earlier, but now he was determined to get it right. He lifted his leg, twisting his hips and generating power from his core. His foot swung through the air, aiming for the bag's center. He continued training, his movements fluid and confident. Sweat dripped from his brow, his muscles burning with fatigue, but he didn't stop. He was in the zone, his focus solely on improving his skills. The punching bag swayed back and forth, its surface worn from Damon's relentless assault. Damon's laughter had stopped, replaced by a serious face. He was a warrior in training. Chapter 63. Back home, Damon finished his training session, sitting back against the tree trunk, feeling exhausted but satisfied. He thought to himself, "This is the best training I've had since I started." He had improved significantly, correcting mistakes in his form and working on finding a flow in his movements during a fight. As he reflected on his training, Damon noticed something about himself. His temper. He had a tendency to get impatient and throw unnecessary punches when his initial ones didn't land as planned. This wasn't just limited to training. He had done the same thing in actual fights. Damon realized that working on his temper and learning to calm down during fights was essential. He sat on the ground, his back against the tree trunk, his eyes fixed on the space in front of him. He didn't want to lie down, didn't want to look up at the lights, didn't want to hear the announcer's voice declaring his opponent the winner. All because he threw a tantrum, lost control, and let his emotions get the better of him. He thought about his training, how he had tried to manage his temper, to prevent himself from getting angry when he failed. But it was hard, so hard. He would do okay for a while, and then something would happen, and he would lose it again. He would end up angry, frustrated, and disappointed in himself. Damon shook his head, sighing deeply. He felt the weight of his failure, the weight of his temper over him. He knew he needed to work on it, to get better, to be better. He decided to open up his system status interface, to take a look at his stats, to see where he was, where he needed to go. The blue light lit up his face, illuminating his features, casting a glow over his skin. Personal information. Name: Damon Cross. Nickname: Age: 19. Nationality: Irish. Japan. Physical information. Weight: 125 pounds. Height: 6 feet 2 inches. Reach: arm: 74 inches. Leg: 34 inches. But he knew he couldn't give up. He had to keep training, keep pushing himself. These were what he was working with, and he would make the most of it. Maybe unlocking the elixir shop would help. Maybe it would give him some answers. But for now, he would continue to train, to improve his skills and techniques. Damon turned off his status interface, the blue light fading from his face. He stood up, brushing himself off by dusting his hands over his clothes. He felt the dry earth and leaves falling away from his skin as he moved. He walked over to the tree, reaching up to unhook the punching bag from the branch. The chain clacked against the trunk as he lifted it down, the sound echoing through the quiet air. Damon slung the bag over his back, feeling the weight of it settle onto his shoulders. He began to jog, his feet pounding against the earth in a steady rhythm. The sound of his footsteps filled the air as he moved, his breathing steady and calm. As he jogged, the trees seemed to pass by him in a blur, their leaves rustling softly in the gentle breeze of the sunset. The sky was painted with warm hues of orange, pink, and purple, casting a golden glow over the landscape. He jogged on, the motel coming into view in the distance. He could see the buildings rising up, the parking lot stretching out before them. Damon arrived at the motel, holding the punching bag properly, and rushed to enter the room. He didn't even try to hide the bag, knowing his mother would ask where he got it. He would just have to come up with a convincing story. As he opened the door, the aroma of cooking food wafted out, making his stomach growl with hunger. He entered the room, punching bag in hand, and his mother looked up from the stove, a questioning expression on her face. Damon sighed, knowing he had a lot of training ahead of him for the next month. His next fight wasn't close, so he planned to use the time to improve his skills. And with the festival month approaching, he hoped to get more opportunities to fight and gain experience. He walked over to his mother, punching bag still in hand, and said, "Hey, Mom. I'm home." His mother looked at the bag, then back at him, a hint of curiosity in her eyes. Damon knew he had to come up with a good story, so he thought quickly. He could tell her he got it from a friend or that he found it somewhere. But for now, he just smiled and said, "I'll tell you later, Mom. I'm starving. What's for dinner?" His mother smiled, seemingly accepting his response, and turned back to the stove. She knew as her son grew up he had his own secrets. She just hoped he wasn't doing illegal stuff to get gear for fighting. Damon breathed a sigh of relief, knowing he had dodged the question for now. He set the punching bag down and took a seat at the table, ready to enjoy his dinner and plan his training for the next month. Chapter 64. Event Opener. Michael Bosley, dressed in a suit and tie, looked directly into the camera with an enthusiastic smile. "Today, ladies and gentlemen, we have an exciting one in the card." He gestured with his hands. Daniel Green, sitting beside him, chuckled and added, "I think you say that every show, Michael, but not like I disagree with you. We have a big turnaround, a new show opener, and I'm hoping to see what will happen tonight. You should be excited as well." The camera panned out, showing the packed hall, filled with eager fans wearing Battle Extreme merchandise and holding up signs with their favorite local fighters' names. The commentators' table was set up ringside, with a clear view of the octagon. The sound system blasted energetic music, getting the crowd pumped up for the first fight. Michael continued, "We live here in Stockton. The fans are eager to see some intense action, and we're sure to deliver." Daniel nodded in agreement. "That's right, Michael. We have a stacked card tonight, with some of the toughest fighters in the league. It's going to be a wild ride." The music blasted through the speakers, a high-energy beat that got the crowd moving. A short, young man with sandy blonde hair and bright blue eyes bounced into view, his enthusiasm infectious. He was about 5 feet 5 inches with a lean, athletic build, and he moved with a confident swagger. As he made his way to the cage, he stopped by a man who patted him for safety and asked him for a cup check. "Cup." The young fighter obliged, and the cornerman gave him a quick once-over before applying a thin layer of Vaseline to his face. With that done, the young man continued on his way, his eyes fixed intently on the cage. He climbed up the steps and stepped inside, his movements fluid and practiced. Daniel nodded, his eyes lighting up with excitement, and began to break down the fighters. Well, this match is going to be exciting. Let's start with Felix, shall we? Daniel said, his voice clear and concise. Here we have a fighter with a decent record, 5-3, with a 2-win streak in his past fights. He's very skilled in karate, has power and speed. What more do you need? Felix is a force to be reckoned with, and his karate background gives him an edge in terms of discipline and technique. Daniel paused, taking a moment to collect his thoughts before moving on to Edward Whittaker. And then we have Edward, a bit of a special case. I've heard he doesn't have any formal training, he's self-taught, but he's done incredibly well with a record of 2-1 and a win in his last fight. He's a freestyle fighter, most of the time, but I've seen inspiration from kickboxing in most of his moves, so I'm sure he's got good power. Daniel's eyes locked onto the camera, his expression serious. What's interesting about Edward is that he's a wild card. Without formal training, he's had to rely on his natural ability and instincts to get this far. It's going to be fascinating to see how he matches up against Felix's more disciplined approach. The camera cut to a shot of the two fighters, facing off in the octagon, their eyes locked in a fierce stare. The referee, a seasoned official with a no-nonsense attitude, stood between the two fighters, his eyes scanning their faces as he went over the rules one last time. All right, gentlemen, let's go over this again. 3 rounds, 5 minutes each. No eye gouging, no groin shots. You know the drill. Edward Whittaker and Felix Grayson nodded, their eyes locked in a fierce stare. They touched gloves, a gesture of respect and sportsmanship, before stepping back to their respective corners. The referee raised his hands, and the crowd fell silent, anticipating the start of the fight. Ready, fight. The bell rang out, and the two fighters sprang into action. The crowd erupted into cheers, their voices echoing off the walls of the arena as the two warriors were about to clash in the center of the octagon. Chapter 65. Event opener IIAs. Soon as the bell rang, Edward Whittaker shot out of his corner, his movements explosive. He feinted with a left jab, testing Felix Grayson's reaction. Felix, composed and focused, kept his guard high, stepping to the side and circling away from Edward's power hand. Edward didn't waste time. He closed the distance with a quick 1-2 combination, snapping a jab straight down the middle. Felix slipped the jab and countered with a low leg kick that smacked against Edward's lead leg, the impact reverberating through the octagon. Edward winced but didn't slow down. He switched his stance briefly, throwing a quick overhand right. Felix ducked under it, using his karate discipline to stay calm under pressure. He snapped back up with a straight right hand of his own, catching Edward on the chin. Edward staggered back, more surprised than hurt. He quickly regained his footing, shaking off the strike. Felix took a half step forward, his footwork precise, and launched a powerful body kick that thudded into Edward's side. Edward grunted, feeling the sting of the blow, but immediately fired back with a heavy right hand that Felix barely blocked. The crowd roared as the fighters exchanged blows. Felix moved smoothly, his karate background evident in his accurate strikes and controlled movements. He threw a quick front kick, which Edward hardly evaded, the tip of Felix's toes grazing his midsection. Edward, relying on his instincts, launched a wild flurry of punches. He was unpredictable, mixing in hooks, uppercuts, and a straight left that kept Felix guessing. Felix used his agility to avoid the most dangerous shots, but Edward's relentless attack forced him to back up against the cage. Sensing an opportunity, Edward pressed forward, throwing a vicious left hook aimed at Felix's head. Felix, in a split-second decision, ducked under the hook and exploded forward with a powerful double-leg takedown, lifting Edward off his feet and slamming him to the canvas. Edward winced, pain radiating from his ribs, but he didn't let it stop him. He fired off a quick jab to keep Felix at bay. Then moved off the cage with a burst of speed, re-engaging in the center of the octagon. With the crowd on their feet, the fighters continued to trade shots. Edward's freestyle unpredictability clashed beautifully with Felix's disciplined technique. Neither man gave an inch, each strike more powerful than the last. As the round drew to a close, Felix landed a crisp right cross, causing Edward's head to snap back. Edward retaliated with a powerful left hook that landed clean on Felix's cheek. The two men were breathing heavily, their bodies bruised and battered, but their determination unwavering. The bell finally rang, signaling the end of the round. The fighters stepped back, sweat dripping from their bodies, their faces marked by the exchange of blows. They gave each other a brief nod of respect before turning to their corners. The first round had set the stage for an all-out war, and everyone in the arena knew that the best was yet to come. As the bell rang, signaling the end of the first round, Felix Grayson made his way to his corner, where his coach was waiting with a towel and a water bottle. The coach, a seasoned veteran with a calm demeanor, quickly set to work, giving Felix advice while checking for any injuries. "Felix, listen up," the coach said, his voice steady and focused. "You did well with your kicks, but you need to keep your distance a bit more. Edward's coming in wild, and he's catching you with those hooks. Keep using your jab to control the range." Felix nodded, taking deep breaths as his coach continued. "You've got the right idea with the low kicks. They're slowing him down, but don't get too predictable. Mix it up with some feints and keep him guessing." The coach wiped sweat from Felix's face. "Stay sharp and don't let him catch you off guard. You're letting him get too close." Felix drank from the water bottle, his eyes locked on his coach. "Got it. I'll keep my distance and be more careful." The coach nodded approvingly. "Exactly. Also, watch for his wild spinning attacks. He's trying to catch you with something flashy. Stay focused and counter when you see the openings." Felix took a deep breath, feeling more confident. "Thanks. I'll use my range better and avoid those big swings." Chapter 66. The second round. Michael Bosley and Daniel Green spoke excitedly as the fighters took their corners. "Wow, that first round was intense," Michael said. "Edward's wild style really makes for an exciting fight, while Felix's discipline is something to admire." Daniel nodded. "Absolutely, Michael. Felix has been using his technique effectively, but Edward's unpredictability and resilience keeps him in the fight. And speaking of Edward, that cut above his left eye is starting to bleed more. It could become a problem if it's not controlled." Michael agreed. "Yes, the cut is definitely an issue. It's making Edward's face look worse for wear. But he's showing impressive toughness, not letting it slow him down." Daniel added, "Felix will be capitalizing on the cut, landing strikes that keep opening it up. Edward's going to need to dig deep and find a way to overcome this one." The bell rang for the second round. Edward and Felix met in the center of the octagon. Edward came out strong, throwing a number of fast punches. Felix moved back, using his karate footwork to stay out of range. Felix remembered his coach's advice. He used his jab more to keep Edward at bay. He moved side to side, making it harder for Edward to land a clean shot. Edward tried to close the distance quickly, throwing a heavy right hook. Felix ducked under the hook and responded with a quick front kick to Edward's midsection. The kick landed cleanly, pushing Edward back. Felix followed up with a spinning side kick. Edward blocked it with his forearm but felt the force behind it. Felix's movements were smooth and calculated, showing the benefits of his disciplined training. Edward, feeling the pressure, attempted a high kick. Felix saw it coming and stepped back, avoiding the kick. Felix then used a quick jab and followed with a low kick to Edward's lead leg. The kick hit hard, and Edward limped slightly. Felix moved in with a combination of punches, aiming for Edward's head and body. He used his skills to keep the strikes accurate and powerful. Edward struggled to defend against the precision of Felix's attacks. Edward, showing his resilience, managed to land a clean left hook to Felix's jaw. Felix lost his footing but quickly regained it. He refocused, using his agility to avoid further damage. Felix continued to exploit the cut, landing a sharp right cross that caused more blood to spill down Edward's face. Edward, his vision impaired, struggled to keep up with Felix's accurate strikes. He tried to retaliate with a high kick, but Felix anticipated it and stepped aside, avoiding the blow. Seeing that Edward was struggling, Felix increased his offensive. He landed a spinning side kick to Edward's ribs, which made Edward wince and take a step back. Felix followed up with a quick jab to the face, landing it right on the cut. The impact caused Edward to stagger, and the referee stepped in to closely observe the situation. When the referee stepped in to pause the fight and called for the ringside doctor, the commentators reacted immediately. Michael Bosley said, "The referee's stepping in. This cut above Edward's eye is looking pretty bad. Felix's targeting has made it worse." Daniel Green added, "It's clear the referee's concerned about the severity of that injury. The doctor's on his way in to check it out." Felix and his coach watched intently from their corner as the doctor examined the cut, checking for any signs that it might be too severe for Edward to continue. The arena fell silent as everyone waited for the decision. This cut is severe and bleeding heavily. If it doesn't stop soon, it could impair his vision and pose a significant risk. I recommend pausing the fight to assess if it's safe for him to continue. The doctor spoke with the referee. Edward, breathing heavily, stood in the center of the octagon, his face marked by blood and bruises. After a few moments of discussion, the referee and the doctor exchanged a few final words. The referee raised his hand, signaling that the fight would be temporarily stopped. The crowd waited anxiously for the final decision. As the doctor continued to assess Edward's injury, the outcome of the fight remained uncertain. Chapter 67. Doctor and referee decision. As the referee and ringside doctor continued to assess Edward's injury, the commentators, Michael Bosley and Daniel Green, provided their analysis. Michael Bosley spoke first, his voice filled with concern. "This is a crucial moment, Daniel. Edward's cut is definitely more severe than before. Felix has been targeting it throughout the round, and it's clearly affecting Edward's performance." Daniel Green nodded in agreement. "Absolutely, Michael. Felix's strategy to focus on the cut has been effective. It's given him a clear advantage, and the doctor's presence here indicates that the injury could be serious. Edward's tough, but this is a significant issue." Michael continued, "You've got to admire Edward's heart. Despite the blood and the pain, he's kept coming forward, showing incredible resilience. But at some point, the cut might just become too much to overcome." Daniel added, "Felix's discipline and technique have really shown through in this round. He's managed to stay composed and exploit the cut effectively. If the fight does continue, it will be interesting to see how Edward responds and if he can adapt to Felix's precision." Michael glanced at the octagon, where Edward was still being evaluated. "Right now, it's up to the doctor and the referee to make the call. It's a tough situation, but safety always comes first. We've seen many fights where a fighter's injury has led to a stoppage, and it looks like we might be on the verge of one here." Daniel leaned closer to the camera, his expression serious. "If the fight is stopped, Felix will have earned the win through his smart strategy and effective execution." As they spoke, the ringside doctor finished his evaluation and conferred with the referee. The crowd watched in silence, waiting for the final decision on whether the fight would continue or end due to the injury. In the middle of the crowd, a young man named, his blue eyes fixed intently on the ring, Damon. He had arrived early, with nothing else to do before his own match, and decided to watch the first fight. He had been surprised when one of the fighters, Edward, was the same person he had met in the locker room showers earlier. Damon's interest in the fight grew, and he found himself invested in the outcome. He watched as Edward struggled to continue, his cut worsening with each passing moment. The ringside doctor and referee conferred, their faces grave with concern. Michael Bosley's voice filled the arena. "This is heartbreaking to see. Edward gave it everything he had, but it looks like the fight is over for him." Daniel Green added softly, "He's worked so hard, and to have it end like this. You can see how much it means to him." The announcer entered the cage, the microphone in hand. The crowd fell silent, waiting for the final word. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice echoed through the arena, "due to a medical stoppage, the referee has called a halt to this contest, declaring the winner by TKO, Felix Grayson." The crowd cheered, though the mood was subdued. Felix raised his hands in victory, but his eyes lingered on Edward, still sitting by the cage. Michael spoke again. "Felix earned that win, but this was a tough one to watch. Edward gave it his all, and you can see how much it hurts him." Daniel nodded. "He fought with everything he had, but sometimes, it just isn't enough. We wish Edward the best and hope he bounces back from this." Damon stood up, his eyes fixed on the scene before him. He shook his head slowly, taking a deep breath in through his nose and out through his mouth. He turned and made his way to the back. He needed to prepare for his own fight, to focus on his own strategy and technique. As he walked, he couldn't help but think about Edward, who had just suffered a tough defeat. He had seemed so determined, so focused on winning. Damon wondered what had driven him to fight with such intensity. Meanwhile, Edward made his way to the back, his eyes fixed on the ground. He didn't talk to anyone, didn't acknowledge the people around him. He just kept walking, his shoulders slumped in defeat. Felix, on the other hand, was celebrating his win. He was smiling, laughing, and high-fiving his cornerman. He was basking in the glory of his victory, enjoying the cheers of the crowd. As Damon approached the locker room, he could hear the sound of Edward's heavy breathing. He sounded like he was struggling to hold back tears. Chapter 68. My time now. Damon stood in front of the door, his hand raised to knock. But he hesitated, thinking it was better to leave Edward alone. He seemed to be taking the loss very hard. Damon turned around and walked quickly towards his own room. As he walked, he pushed the thoughts of Edward out of his mind. He didn't want to think about the other fighters' disappointment and frustration. Instead, he focused on his own upcoming fight. Damon knew that losing wasn't the end of the world. He had learned that lesson before, but it was easy to say that now, when he wasn't the one who had lost. He had a temper, and he knew how hard it was to control his emotions when things didn't go his way. Damon entered his room and sat down on the bench, taking a few deep breaths. He tried to clear his mind and focus on the present moment. He thought about his own strategy and technique, going over the moves he would make in the ring. He stood up and began to pace back and forth, his mind filled with thoughts of the fight. Damon walked over to the table, where his fighting gear was laid out. He removed the plastic wrapping and began to undress, taking off his clothes and putting on his fighting shorts. He then put on his protective cup, making sure it was securely in place. Next, he wrapped his hands with the bandages, carefully covering his wrists and fingers. He then slipped on his gloves, feeling the familiar weight and texture of the padding. Damon closed his eyes, taking a moment to focus on his breathing. He thought about his training, and how far he had come. He had spent countless hours practicing his basic punches, kicks, and elbows with the new punching bag. When he first started on the punching bag, his proficiency level on basic Muay Thai attacks was at 50%. Damon nodded back and kept walking, his eyes focused on the cage ahead. He felt the adrenaline starting to rise, but he stayed calm. He knew he had to keep his emotions in check. The announcer's voice boomed through the arena. Introducing Damon Cross. The crowd responded with cheers, and Damon felt a surge of confidence. He kept walking, one step at a time, towards the cage. He glanced across the cage at his opponent, a shorter fighter named Jackson Lee, as usual. As Damon entered the cage, the commentators began their discussion. Michael Bosley spoke first. Well, that was quite a tough end for Edward earlier. It's always hard to see a fighter's last chance slip away. Daniel Green nodded. Yes, it's tough. But now it's time for others to shine. Damon Cross is stepping into the cage next. He's on a 2-0 win streak. His Muay Thai skills are impressive. Michael added, Damon's been doing great with his kicks and elbows. He's shown strong performance in his last fights. Daniel continued, his opponent, Jackson Lee, has a strong boxing background. He relies on his punches. It'll be interesting to see how Damon's Muay Thai handles Jackson's boxing. The crowd cheered as Damon and Jackson faced each other. The stage was set for another exciting fight. The referee entered the cage and addressed both fighters. All right, gentlemen, he said, I'm going to go over the rules. Obey my commands at all times. Protect yourself at all times. No hitting to the back of the head, no low blows, no grabbing the cage, and no kneeing the groin. If you want to touch gloves, do it now. Damon and Jackson touched gloves. Fight clean. Fight fair. If you're ready, I'm ready. Let's have a good fight. The referee stepped back to his position and signaled for the fight to begin. All right, fighters, ready, fight. Damon flashed a confident smile, his eyes locking onto Jackson's across the cage. Just another day in the office, he muttered, his voice low and even. The words were going to be a familiar mantra, a reminder that he'd been in tough spots before and always come out on top. Chapter 69. The fight. The bell rang, and the fight between Damon Cross and Jackson Lee began. Damon moved forward with confidence, his Muay Thai skills ready to shine. Jackson, shorter and with a boxing background, took a cautious stance, trying to stay out of Damon's range. Damon started with a quick low kick, aiming at Jackson's lead leg. Jackson winced but kept moving. Damon didn't waste time. He threw another low kick, then followed with a straight right hand. Jackson tried to respond with a jab, but Damon ducked and slipped out of the way. Commentators spoke as the fighters moved. Michael said, Damon's low kicks are looking sharp. He's using his height and reach as well. Daniel added, Jackson needs to close the distance to use his boxing. But Damon's doing a great job keeping him at bay. Damon continued his attack. He landed another low kick, then added a sharp left elbow to Jackson's side. Jackson staggered slightly but stayed on his feet. He tried to move in with a combination of punches, but Damon blocked and countered with a right cross. Damon's height gave him an advantage. He was able to keep Jackson at a distance, using his longer reach. He landed a few more punches and a heavy elbow strike that made Jackson back up. Jackson looked frustrated, struggling to get past Damon's defense. Michael remarked, "Damon is really controlling the pace here. Jackson seems to be struggling to find his rhythm." Daniel agreed, "Yes, Damon's strikes are landing cleanly. Jackson needs to make a move soon, or he'll be in trouble." Jackson tried to close the distance again, throwing a combo of punches. The announcer walked into the cage with a steady stride, microphone in hand. Jackson Lee had already regained his senses and was talking with his corner men. Damon Cross stood alone in the center, his gaze focused, awaiting the official decision. The referee, standing between the two fighters, took hold of their wrists, preparing to declare the victor. The crowd quieted down, eager to hear the final result. The announcer raised the microphone to his lips, his voice booming through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, referee John Doe has called a stop to this contest at 2 minutes, 35 seconds of the very first round, declaring the winner by knockout." The pause added to the tension even though everyone already knew who won. Every eye in the arena focused on the center of the cage. The announcer's voice rose as he called out, "Damon Cross." The crowd erupted into cheers, their energy filling the venue. The referee lifted Damon's hand high, signaling his victory. Damon allowed a small, confident smile to cross his face as he soaked in the applause. Damon shook the referee's hand, then the announcer's, as a sign of respect. Next, he walked over to Jackson, who was still recovering from the knockout. Damon extended his hand, and Jackson took it, his eyes narrowing slightly, pulling him into a hug. "I heard you said goodnight to me," Jackson said, his voice laced with a hint of annoyance. "Maybe you should go pick on guys your own size." He stepped back, forcing a smile onto his face. Damon glared at Jackson, feeling a surge of irritation. He couldn't deny it. Jackson's words were getting to him. It wasn't like they were lies, either. Damon had been dominating the fight, and his height and reach had given him a significant advantage. But Damon pushed the thoughts aside, focusing on his goal. He was going to fight the last match, then request to change weight classes to a suitable from Mr. Steele. In his mind, the next fight was already a guaranteed win. Chapter 70. Second chance. Damon walked out of the hall, closing the door behind him. He let out a deep sigh, feeling a mix of relief and satisfaction. As he made his way down the hallway, he noticed some of the staff nodding in congratulations. He smiled and grinned, acknowledging their recognition. He continued walking towards the room assigned to him, his footsteps echoing off the walls. The hallway was quiet, with only a few people milling about. Damon's mind was still on the fight, replaying the moments that led to his victory. As he turned a corner, he saw Mr. Steele standing outside his room. Mr. Steele was leaning against the wall, his arms crossed and a serious expression on his face. Damon felt a slight sense of unease, wondering what Mr. Steele wanted to talk about. "Hey, Mr. Steele," Damon said, approaching him. "What's up?" Mr. Steele pushed off the wall and stood up straight. "Damon, congratulations on your win," he said, his voice firm but neutral. "You're doing well on our challenge." Damon nodded, feeling a sense of pride. "Thanks, Mr. Steele. I've been working hard." Mr. Steele's words hung in the air, his voice low and serious. "I can see your improvement, but now, your next match, might be the last time we meet, or the start of something." Damon nodded, taking a deep breath in through his nose and out through his mouth. He knew what was at stake. If he lost, he would lose the opportunity to have Mr. Steele's support. Mr. Steele's eyes seemed to bore into Damon's soul, as if searching for something. "Your next opponent will be dangerous, and I mean this." He paused, his gaze intensifying. "He will want it more than you." Damon felt a shiver run down his spine. Who was this opponent that would want it so badly? Mr. Steele's hand came down on Damon's shoulder, his grip firm but not crushing. "So Damon, I don't want you to tell me you want this. I want you to show me." His voice was firm, commanding. Damon nodded again, determination rising up inside him. Mr. Steele fixed his suit. He began walking away, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. As he made his way out of the building, he bumped into Edward, who had been through a rough match. Edward's face was busted up, with bruises and cuts all over it. His eyes looked like they had taken a beating, with dark circles and puffy skin, especially the left one. Damon approached him, stretching out his hand to Edward. "Sup man," he said, with a friendly smile. Edward smiled back, despite the pain in his eyes. He shook Damon's hand. "Hey man, ha ha ha, nice match," he said, complimenting Damon on his win. Damon scratched his head. "To you as well, even though you lost, you did amazing, so don't beat yourself over it, you'll get next time," he said, trying to reassure Edward. But Edward's face changed, his expression turning serious. "You don't understand, my dad," he started to say, but Damon interrupted him. "Hey, I think Mr. Steele is calling for you," Damon said, nodding towards Mr. Steele, who was standing across the hallway, pointing at Edward. Edward's face showed a flash of fear, before he turned and walked towards Mr. Steele. "Wait for me," he said, looking back at Damon. Damon waited, looking at Mr. Steele talk with Edward. He wondered if Edward had gotten the same offer as him. Maybe that's why his loss had gotten him so emotional. Damon began to sympathize with Edward, thinking about how tough it must be to face such high stakes. As he watched, Edward smiled at Mr. Steele, but when he turned around, his face was serious and cold. Damon walked towards him, but Edward passed him by as if he didn't exist. He was confused as he watched Edward's back disappear into the distance. He stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Why had Edward ignored him like that? And what had Mr. Steele said to him to make him look so serious? Damon's mind was full of questions as he watched Edward walk away. He felt a sense of unease, wondering what was going on. Chapter 71. A look in a different life. In a cozy, mid-income house, a man was whistling a happy tune as he cooked a meal in the kitchen. The aroma of sizzling vegetables and savory spices filled the air, making the space feel warm and inviting. If Damon had been there, he would have recognized the man as the cab driver he had spoken to one night. The man's face lit up with a happy smile as he stood in front of the sink, gazing out the window at the night sky. The kitchen lights reflected off the window pane, casting a warm glow on the man's face. His eyes, a deep brown, sparkled with a mix of happiness and concern. As he stirred the pot, his expression changed, and a look of pain reflected on his face. He muttered to himself, "Where are you, Eddie?" His voice was low and worried, and his eyes seemed to cloud over with concern. The man's hands moved mechanically, stirring the pot, as his mind wandered. He stood there, frozen, lost in thought, as the whistling stopped. The sound of the door opening startled him, and he turned towards it, his eyes widening slightly. He smiled wryly to himself, feeling a mix of emotions. He dried his hands on a towel, the fabric soft against his skin, and made his way to the front door. As he reached the door, he saw his son, Edward, entering the house. Edward's face was wounded, with bruises and cuts visible on his skin. His eyes looked tired, with dark circles underneath. The man's heart sank, seeing his son like this. Edward's voice cracked, "I've said it before, I won't leave. You may think that because you're old, we don't need you, but she needs you, Dad. We already lost Mom, do you think she can take another loss?" Edward's father took a deep breath, trying to calm down. He walked away, back to the kitchen, where the smell of smoke from the burning food filled the air. "You're right, she can't afford to lose me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But Eddie, have you thought that she can't afford to lose you as well?" He disappeared into the kitchen. He silenced that followed a difference to the earlier yelling. Edward stood there, frozen, his mind thinking about his father's words. As he thought about his father's words, Edward knew they were true. He felt a sense of responsibility wash over him. Just then, a small head peeked around the doorframe, with her piggy tails and curious eyes. Edward's face lit up with a warm smile as he knelt down to greet her. "Hey Lulu," he said softly, opening his arms wide. Lulu ran into his embrace, and Edward hugged her tightly, feeling a surge of love and protection. This little girl was his everything, his reason for fighting, his livelihood. He would never regret anything as long as she was by his side. Lulu looked up at her brother with glassy eyes, concern etched on her small face. "Does it hurt?" she asked, pointing to the bruises and the cut on Edward's face. Edward chuckled, trying to reassure her, but he could see the sadness deep in her eyes. "No, Lulu, it doesn't hurt," he said gently. "You wanna know why?" Lulu nodded, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Edward lifted her up, and she yelped with delight. "Well, because I got my little monster here with me," he said, smiling warmly. Lulu giggled, snuggling into her brother's chest. Edward felt a sense of peace wash over him. He stood up, holding Lulu close, and said, "Come on, let's get you ready for dinner." He walked towards the kitchen, Lulu's small hands wrapped around his neck, her face nestled in the crook of his shoulder. The warmth of the kitchen enveloped them, filled with the smell of burned food and the sound of their father's quiet sobs. "How about I go show you something before we eat?" he said, turning around with a guilty look. Chapter 72. Preparations. Damon had arrived home safely without any trouble. He had wondered what Edward and Mr. Steele had talked about to make Edward act cold, but soon he forgot about it. Mr. Steele's words were echoing in his head. "Your next opponent is dangerous, and wants it more than you." Damon thought about these words. He felt a sense of unease. He didn't know who his next opponent was, but he knew he had to be careful. Today's event had been held pretty late. Damon was informed that the next one would be even later. Damon entered the room, finding his mother already fast asleep. He decided not to disturb her, instead choosing to quietly have his dinner. After eating, he got ready for bed and lay down, trying to rest. The events of the day, especially Mr. Steele's warning, lingered in his mind, but he eventually drifted off to sleep. Damon's eyes closed, and he fell into a deep slumber, unaware of what the next day would bring. The following weeks, Damon trained harder than ever before. He knew he had to make the most of his time. Despite his confidence, he still had doubts buried deep within him. He wanted to overcome them. One day, Damon took a spin on the wheel. He won a technique called meditation technique. When he read the description, he couldn't believe his eyes. Meditation technique. This technique is a mental conditioning technique designed to enhance focus, reduce anxiety, and improve mental clarity. Damon remembered asking himself how to improve his mental stats before. Now, it seemed like things were falling into place. He felt a sense of excitement and hope. Damon continued his routine as usual. He would start with running, then move on to exercises. After that, he would practice his moves on the punching bag. He would begin with basic moves and gradually move on to more complex ones, like the question mark kick. He had been trying to master this move for a while now. Damon made sure to practice until his body ached. He didn't want to leave anything behind. He wanted to give it his all. As the fight drew closer, Damon went through all the necessary procedures. He arrived at the medical facility for his checkup, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. The doctor examined him thoroughly, checking his vital signs, reflexes, and overall physical condition. After a few minutes, the doctor gave Damon a nod of approval. "You're cleared to fight," he said with a smile. Damon felt a surge of relief and excitement. He had passed the medical checkup, and nothing could stop him from stepping into the ring now. With the medical checkup out of the way, Damon began to taper his training. He reduced the intensity of his workouts, focusing on light exercises and techniques to avoid any injuries before the fight. He didn't want to risk getting hurt now, not when he was so close to the big day. Damon's days became more relaxed, with shorter training sessions and more time for rest and recovery. Damon opened the Quest interface, and his eyes widened as he read the message. Win your 3 upcoming MATCHESREWARD, SYRUM, Potion Shop Access matches. 1/2. This was it, the moment he had been working towards. Winning this next match would not only grant him access to the Sirum shop, but also secure Mr. Steele's support. Damon thought about how far he had come. He wondered where he would be if the system had never activated. Probably still on the streets with his mom, struggling to make ends meet. But that was all in the past now. This match was more than just a fight, it was a chance to change his life forever. Better times were coming, and Damon was ready to seize them. Whoever the opponent was, it's your funeral. Chapter 73. Damon Cross vs. Edward Whittaker. Damon sat on a bench in front of the mirror, adopting a meditation posture. He wore his usual fighting kit, consisting of shorts and gloves. His eyes were fixed on his reflection, his mind focused on the upcoming fight. During the weigh-in, he had finally discovered who his opponent was. The revelation had left him stunned but not entirely surprised. He recalled the conversation between Edward and Mr. Steele, and Edward's reaction after losing his last fight. Mr. Steele's words echoed in his mind. Your opponent wants it more than you. Who else would be desperate than the guy who cried when he lost? And due to his suspicion before, his training had been tailored to prepare him for Edward's fighting style. He imagined the chaotic fighter, with his unpredictable movements and aggressive attacks, facing him in the cage. Damon's eyes narrowed as he visualized the fight. He could see himself standing calmly, his fists clenched, ready to face the storm that was Edward. Damon looked at the clock on the wall. It was almost his time. He had done everything he needed to do, weigh-ins and checks. Now all he could do was wait. Wait for the knock on the door. Wait for the signal that it was time to go out there and face Edward. The knock came, and Damon stood up, his heart beating slightly faster. He took his mouthguard and slipped it into his mouth, and he got out of the room, and walked towards the hallway. Today, the hallway was different. It was packed with people, staff and officials milling up and down, talking in hushed tones. He made his way towards the hall, but before he could twist the handle to the hall, the guy who had been waiting near the door spoke up, putting his hand up. You go last, he said, his voice firm but not unkind. Damon paused, his hand on the door handle. He took a deep breath. In the hall, the stands were full, packed with people who liked fighting, had nothing to do at night, or were just bored. The crowd's enthusiasm boosted Damon's confidence as he made his way to the cage. Michael said, Damon Cross is making his way to the cage, and the crowd is clearly excited to see him in action. He's gaining fans. Daniel added, absolutely. Damon is on a hot streak, and the fans remember his performances. With his height and power, not to mention the chin on him, he's a tough opponent for anyone. Edward has a real challenge ahead. At the cage entrance, an official stopped Damon for the procedure check. The official examined Damon's gloves and then asked to see his mouthguard. Damon opened his mouth to show it was in place. The official then asked for the cup check, and Damon patted himself to show everything was secure. All clear. Good luck, the official said, giving Damon a pat on the back. Damon walked towards the cage, his gaze locked on the inside. He climbed through the cage door and stepped inside, his eyes meeting Edward's. Both of them had no visible expression showing. The announcer stepped to the center of the cage with the microphone. Please welcome, Damon Cross. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, their excitement reaching a peak. Commentators Michael Bosley and Daniel Green began their analysis as the fighters prepared for the bout. Michael nodded. It's interesting to see how these two fighters match up. Edward's aggressive style versus Damon's controlled approach. Damon has been impressive with his last clean knockout, and now he's looking to make it 4-in-a-row win streak. Daniel continued, Edward's last loss might have taken a toll on him. Today's opponent is not too different than his last one. Like you said, it's aggressive against controlled, so maybe he needs to change his approach, otherwise Damon's power and accuracy could make this a quick fight if he finds his opening. As Refi finished his talk with the fighters and they touched gloves, everyone was ready for a spectacle. Michael concluded, we're about to get underway. Both fighters are in their corners, and this match is set to begin. It's going to be a clash of styles, and we're in for a treat. The bell rang, and the fight between Damon Cross and Edward Whittaker was about to start. Chapter 74. Damon Cross vs. Edward Whittaker. The bell rang, and the fight between Damon Cross and Edward Whittaker began. Damon and Edward approached each other cautiously. Damon, as a Muay Thai fighter, took a measured stance. His feet were planted firmly, and his eyes followed Edward's every move. Edward, with his aggressive kickboxing style, bounced on his feet, his eyes focused and sharp. Damon moved first, delivering a low kick to Edward's lead leg. The kick was sharp but not overly powerful. Edward winced slightly but quickly returned to his stance, his eyes narrowing as he assessed Damon. Commentators Michael Bosley and Daniel Green began their analysis. Michael said, we're seeing a slow start here. Damon's using his Muay Thai skills to keep his distance, landing low kicks to test Edward's reactions. Daniel agreed, Yes, and Edward is known for his aggressive style. It looks like he's trying to find an opening. Damon seems to be controlling the pace for now, but it's early. Edward responded with a low kick of his own, aiming at Damon's outer thigh. Damon blocked the kick with his shin, and both fighters circled each other, their eyes locked. Damon tried to remain patient, focusing on his breathing. He knew he had to control his impatience and not rush his attacks. He threw another low kick, landing it just above Edward's knee. Edward took a step back but quickly closed the distance. Damon threw a front kick, aiming for Edward's midsection. Edward dodged the kick and stepped in with a quick combination of punches. Damon blocked most of the punches but felt a couple of light taps on his gloves. Michael noted, Damon's keeping his distance with those kicks, but Edward is starting to close in. It's interesting to see how Damon is handling Edward's aggression. The commentators wrapped up their analysis as the fighters prepared for the next round. Michael said, "That was an interesting first round. Damon's strategy is clear, and he's sticking to it well. Edward's aggression hasn't broken through yet." Daniel added, "Damon's patience and control are impressive. If he keeps this up, he could wear Edward down and find his opening. We'll see how Edward adjusts in the next round." The fighters took their corners, ready to continue the fight. The crowd's energy was high, eager to see how the match would unfold. Damon sat in his corner, alone with his thoughts, gazing across the ring at Edward, who was staring back at him with an intense gaze. This was a unique matchup, with neither fighter having a team in their corner. No coaches, no trainers, no cornermen to offer advice or guidance. Just two fighters, relying solely on their own skills, experience, and instincts to navigate the battle. This solitary setup created an intriguing dynamic, as both Damon and Edward had to rely on their own mental toughness and strategic thinking to outmaneuver each other. They had to analyze their own mistakes, adjust their tactics on the fly, and push themselves to their limits without any external support. The isolation in the corners added an extra layer of psychological complexity to the fight, as both fighters knew they were completely responsible for their own success or failure. If they lost, they could only blame themselves. A man, with his long black hair tied back in a bun and a neatly trimmed beard that framed his face, sat in a dimly lit office. His eyes were fixed on the monitor mounted on the wall, displaying the live feed of the fight between Damon and Edward. A sly smile spread across his face as he pulled out a cigarette and lit it, taking a long drag. He exhaled slowly, his eyes never leaving the screen, and muttered to himself, "Show me what you've got, boys." Chapter 75. Damon Cross vs. Edward Whittaker. The bell rang to start the second round, and both fighters moved to the center of the cage. Damon and Edward faced each other, their stances ready and their eyes focused. Damon resumed his cautious approach, his movements calculated as he aimed to keep Edward at a distance. Edward, looking more serious, shifted his stance and began to press forward. Damon threw a low kick, which Edward blocked with his shin. Edward countered with a quick jab to Damon's face, landing a light tap on his cheek. Damon felt the impact but maintained his composure. He responded with a roundhouse kick aimed at Edward's midsection. Edward dodged slightly, but Damon's kick landed on his side. Michael said, "The second round is underway, and we're already seeing a more active Edward. He's landing some strikes now, which could make things interesting." Daniel agreed, "Yes, Edward is pressing the action more this round. Damon is still controlling the distance, but Edward's punches are finding their mark. Damon needs to stay sharp." Edward threw a combination of punches, connecting with a few jabs and a right cross. Damon blocked most of the punches but felt a couple land on his gloves and forearms. Damon quickly countered with a low kick to Edward's leg. Edward winced but continued to advance, looking for openings. Damon landed a side kick to Edward's ribs, pushing him back. Edward stumbled slightly but quickly regained his balance. He came back with a series of quick kicks aimed at Damon's legs. Damon absorbed the kicks and retaliated with a knee strike to Edward's torso. Michael remarked, "Damon's knee strike was effective, but Edward's kicks are becoming more frequent. It's a back and forth exchange now, and both fighters are landing strikes." Daniel noted, "Damon's patience is still a key factor, but Edward's increasing aggression could change the dynamic of the fight. Damon needs to stay focused and adjust his strategy." Edward quickly moved to try and catch Damon off guard. He feinted a move to the side, but Damon anticipated the strike and sidestepped. Damon saw another chance and rushed in with a powerful right hook. However, Edward had already anticipated Damon's move. He dodged the punch and retaliated with a clean hit to Damon's face. The impact was sharp, and Damon felt a shock as he stumbled backward. The crowd's excitement grew as Edward pressed his advantage. Michael Bosley shouted, "This could be it." Edward's counter has Damon where he wants him. The fight might end here. Daniel Green added, "Damon's clearly stunned. Edward's timing has been impeccable. This is a critical moment in the match." Edward, sensing the opportunity, threw another punch. Damon, still on his feet but clearly shaken and unsure of his surroundings, tried to defend. His movements were sluggish, and he struggled to find his footing. Edward prepared for a powerful overhead punch, aiming to end the fight. Just as he was about to launch his final blow, the bell rang loudly, signaling the end of the second round. The sound cut through the arena, stopping Edward's attack and saving Damon from what could have been a decisive loss. Damon staggered back to his corner, breathing heavily and visibly dazed. As the bell rang to end the second round, the commentators wasted no time in discussing the dramatic turn of events. Michael Bosley said, "This is one of the worst performances we've seen from Damon Cross in this round. He's been caught off guard repeatedly and that last punch from Edward nearly ended his streak. Damon's been dominant throughout last round, but tonight's really been pushed to his limits." Daniel Green added, "Absolutely. Edward's aggressive style has exposed some vulnerabilities in Damon's game. We're seeing Damon at his most vulnerable. If he doesn't make significant adjustments in the last round, his impressive streak could come to a sudden end." Chapter 76. Damon Cross vs. Edward Whittaker. IV. Damon sat on his corner stool, wiping the sweat from his face and arms with a towel. He took the water bottle from his cornerman and drank some water, feeling the cool liquid slide down his parched throat. He was struggling to catch his breath, his chest heaving with exhaustion. As he looked down at his hands, he saw that his palms were sweaty under his gloves. His knees felt weak, his arms heavy. He tried to shake off the fatigue, but it was no use. He was tired, and he knew it. Despite his calm exterior, Damon was nervous. He was worried that he might lose the fight if he didn't turn things around. He shook his head, trying to clear his mind. He needed to focus on the final round. Damon thought about his plan for the last round. He wanted to take the fight to the ground. He hadn't seen Edward do any groundwork, so he might have the upper hand. But he knew it wouldn't be easy. He had to manage to pull off the takedown, and he had no practice at all. Damon took another sip of water, feeling it trickle down his throat. The bell rang for the final round, and Damon stepped out of his corner, taking a deep breath. His legs still felt heavy, but his determination pushed him forward. The crowd roared as both fighters moved to the center of the cage, knowing this round would decide everything. Edward was quick to reassert his aggressive approach, his eyes locked on Damon. He feinted with a jab, testing Damon's reactions. Damon, however, was more cautious this time, keeping his guard high and his distance measured. He wasn't about to get caught by another sudden punch. Damon circled to his left, keeping his footwork light. He knew he couldn't afford to stand still and trade blows with Edward. His mind raced, calculating every move, every feint, every breath. Edward lunged in with a quick combination. Jab, cross, and a low kick. But Damon anticipated it. He stepped back just enough to avoid the punches, then checked the low kick with his shin. For a moment, it seemed like Edward would remain standing. He widened his base, trying to maintain his balance, but Damon was relentless. Damon adjusted his grip, gritting his teeth as he fought to complete the takedown. With a final burst of energy, Damon managed to lift Edward's legs off the ground, sending him tumbling to the mat. The crowd erupted in cheers, recognizing the monumental effort it took for Damon to execute the takedown. Damon landed in Edward's guard, immediately trying to secure his position. He knew his takedown had been sloppy, and Edward was already squirming beneath him, trying to break free. Michael exclaimed, "Damon gets a takedown. It seems he's gunning for groundwork. We've seen him submit someone, so it might be exactly what he needs to swing this fight back in his favor." Daniel added, "Edward was doing so well on the feet, but now he's on his back. Let's see if Damon can capitalize on this position and turn the tide." Damon tried to posture up, looking to land some ground and pound, but Edward was already working to tie him up. Edward wrapped his legs around Damon's waist and pulled him close, making it difficult for Damon to create any distance. Damon knew he needed to be smart here. He couldn't afford to let Edward recover and potentially scramble back to his feet. He pressed his forehead against Edward's chest, keeping his weight down while he looked for an opening. Edward, however, wasn't going to just lie there. He pushed against Damon's hips, trying to create space. Damon responded by dropping a couple of short punches to Edward's ribs, hoping to soften him up. The punches weren't powerful, but they were enough to make Edward rethink his strategy. Edward suddenly shifted his hips, trying to sweep Damon off balance, but Damon anticipated the move. He widened his base and rode the sweep attempt, staying on top. Damon then moved to half guard, pressing down on Edward's leg with his knee, inching his way to a more dominant position. Chapter 77. Damon Cross vs. Edward Whittaker v. Finally the seconds ticked by, each one feeling longer than the last. Damon's arms burned with fatigue, but he couldn't stop now. He threw a few more punches, each one finding its mark on Edward's body. Edward grunted with each hit but remained active, constantly working to defend and escape. Michael observed, Damon's doing a good job of staying active on top. He's landing shots and keeping Edward on the defensive. This could be what he needs to edge out this round. Daniel chimed in, but he's got to be careful. Edward is still dangerous, even off his back. One wrong move, and Damon could find himself in a bad position. Damon knew this too. He couldn't let up, but he also couldn't get reckless. He needed to maintain control and avoid making any mistakes that could give Edward an opening. Edward suddenly exploded with another burst of energy, using his legs to push Damon away. Damon nearly lost his balance but quickly dropped his weight back down, staying in control. He took a deep breath, feeling the strain in his muscles, but forced himself to keep going. Damon shifted his weight, moving to side control. This was better. He had more control and more options for attacking. He pressed his forearm against Edward's neck, applying pressure, while he used his other hand to land a few short punches to Edward's head. Edward twisted his body, trying to turn into Damon, but Damon stayed heavy on top, making it difficult for Edward to move. Damon then tried to slide his knee across Edward's chest, aiming to mount, but Edward blocked it with his arm. Michael noted, Damon's trying to advance to mount, but Edward is doing a good job of defending. This is a battle of wills right now. Daniel added, this is where conditioning comes into play. Both fighters are exhausted, but whoever can push through the fatigue will have the advantage. Damon could feel his energy waning, but he couldn't stop now. He had Edward on the ground, and he needed to make the most of it. He threw a few more punches, trying to wear Edward down. Each punch was a struggle, his arms feeling like they were made of lead, but he kept going. Edward, sensing Damon's fatigue, made another attempt to escape. Daniel responded, Damon needs to dig deep here. He has to force this submission, or he risks letting Edward off the hook. Damon pushed forward again, trying to slip his arm under Edward's chin. Edward blocked him, pushing Damon's arm away. Damon's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the pressure mounting his back every passing second. He decided to try something different. Instead of forcing the choke, he used his weight to press Edward down, making it harder for him to move. Damon then quickly switched his grip, sliding his arm around Edward's neck from the side. It wasn't perfect, but it was his best shot. Edward realized what was happening and tried to roll away, but Damon held him down, his forearm pressing into Edward's throat. Damon squeezed as hard as he could, but he still didn't have the leverage he needed. Edward's arms flailed, trying to pry Damon's grip loose. The crowd roared as they watched the struggle unfold. He knew everyone was on the edge of their seats, waiting to see who would come out on top. Michael's voice rose with excitement, Damon has got the guillotine. But it's not fully locked in yet, he needs to secure it quickly. Daniel added, Edward is fighting with everything he's got. Damon has to adjust, or this might slip through his fingers. The time doesn't seem to allow for Edward's struggle. Damon gritted his teeth, trying to shift his position without losing his grip. He moved his legs, wrapping them around Edward's body to keep him from rolling away. This gave him a bit more control, but it still wasn't enough. Edward struggled beneath him, his movements growing more frantic as the choke tightened. Damon knew he was close, he just needed a bit more leverage. With one final effort, he adjusted his grip, pulling Edward's head deeper under his arm. He felt the choke finally lock in, the pressure on Edward's neck increasing. Michael shouted, he's got it. Damon finally locked in the guillotine. Daniel exclaimed, this could be it. Edward is in deep trouble now. Chapter 78. Damon Cross vs. Edward Whittaker v. The end. Damon squeezed with everything he had left, feeling his muscles burn with the effort. Edward's struggles slowed, his resistance weakening as the choke took effect. Damon could feel the seconds ticking down, but he held on, refusing to let go. Edward's hands clawed weakly at Damon's arms, but there was no escape. Damon could feel the victory within his hands. He just needed to hold on a little longer. The roar of the crowd was a distraction, but Damon didn't lose his focus. Damon tightened his grip, forcing every bit of his remaining strength into the choke. His muscles screamed with the effort as he held on tightly. Edward's struggles continued to weaken, his attempts to escape growing increasingly feeble. For a moment, he seemed to regain some fight, his arms moving sluggishly in a last, desperate effort. But as the choke deepened, his movements began to slow again. The referee moved in to check Edward's condition. He lifted Edward's arm, letting it drop to the mat. It fell limply, but when he checked again, there was a bit of strength remaining. Edward's arm still had some resistance, though it was weak. Damon, determined, kept the choke tight, feeling victory was close. Just as Edward's resistance seemed to be fading completely, the bell rang, signaling the end of the round. The referee stepped in, waving his arms to stop the match. The crowd erupted into a mix of cheers and confusion with some other booing. Damon, panting heavily, released the choke and sank back onto the mat, convinced he had secured the win. The referee moved over to Edward, who was still unconscious. The medical team finished their checks and gave a thumbs up to the commentators. Michael said, "It's reassuring to see that Edward seems to be in good condition. The medical team has cleared him, and now we await the final decision." Daniel added, "Edward appears to be stable, which is great news. Now, the judges will decide the outcome of this intense fight." As the medical team left the cage, Damon saw the judges gathering with the referee and the announcer. They handed the announcer a piece of paper. The announcer glanced at the paper and then looked at Damon. Damon's heart sank as he saw the announcer's gaze shift towards him. The referee and announcer approached the cage. The referee helped Edward to his feet, and Edward walked over to Damon, extending a hand. They pulled each other into a hug. Damon whispered, "No matter the results, man, you made me fight hard, and I appreciate and respect that." "Thank you." Edward nodded in agreement. "Thank you as well." The referee, seeing the sportsmanship between the fighters, cleared his throat. "Okay, come on," he said, taking both fighters' hands and guiding them to the center of the cage. ******** In the office. Mr. Steele's eyes were fixed on the monitor, his expression a mix of surprise and intrigue. He leaned forward, his hands on the table, and said, "Well, I didn't expect this." He stood, and walked closer to the monitor, his eyes scanning the scene. "With that fight, I should have made you main event," he muttered to himself, a hint of regret in his voice. He shook his head, his gaze still fixed on the screen. The monitor showed Damon and Edward embracing, their faces filled with respect and admiration for each other. The announcer stepped forward, holding the piece of paper. He raised his microphone and addressed the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a decision regarding this match." Chapter 79. The decision. The crowd was waiting for the announcer to speak already. Even though this wasn't the UFA, during the fight they had become attached to the fighters. The announcer stepped forward, his voice cutting through the loud noise of the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we have reached the moment you've all been waiting for. This is the official decision for the match between Damon Cross and Edward Whittaker." The audience went silent, following his every word, making sure they didn't even miss one word. The announcer held up the scorecards, his face serious as he looked at the results. After 3 intense rounds of action, he continued, "We have the official scorecards. The judges have rendered their decision based on the performance of both fighters throughout the match." He paused for a moment, letting the tension build up. Any announcer knew how to utilize their words and timing. The crowd was on the edge of their seats, waiting for the announcement. The announcer looked at the scores, then at the fighters in the cage. "The first judge scores the bout 29-28, he announced. The crowd erupted in a mix of cheers and murmurs. "The second judge scores it 28-29, he said. "And the third judge scores it 29-28. The crowd's reaction was a mixture of cheers and applause, with some fans clearly pleased while others were still processing the news. The announcer raised his microphone high. Therefore, the winner by majority decision. Damon Cruz SSS. The crowd cheered as the announcer yelled on the mic, creating a ear-busting sound. Damon's face showed a mix of relief and elation. A close win. He never wants to let the decision fall to the judge's hands. He dropped to his knees in the center of the cage, his arms pumping the air as he celebrated. His fists clenched tightly, and he shouted in pride. The crowd cheered loudly, their support for Damon clear as day. He could feel the energy of the crowd, the noise and the excitement. He could see the faces of the people, all looking at him with admiration and respect. But when he opened his eyes, the vision ended. The small crowd came back into focus. However, the feeling of greatness he had experienced stayed alive in his heart. Damon smiled, knowing that one day his vision would become a reality. The crowd was still looking at him, waiting to see what he would do next. Damon smiled at them, thanking them for their support. Then, he turned and walked out of the cage. The sound of the crowd faded away as Damon walked away. The moment Damon got out of the hall, fresh air hit him, making him sigh in relief. He walked towards his room, his feet carrying him on autopilot as his mind replayed the fight. On the way, he felt someone tap him on the shoulder. He turned around, and his eyes met Edward's. "Aye man, great fight," Damon said, giving Edward a nod of respect. Edward shook his head, his eyes cast downward. "Nah, it's all you, you were better," he started to say, but before he could continue, a voice interrupted them. "You too." Damon and Edward turned to look at who was speaking. They saw Mr. Steele standing there, his signature look of a black suit and hair in a bun. "After your shower, come see me in my office, Mr. Steele said, his voice firm but polite. "I'll see you, Edward, first." He turned and started walking away, his heels clicking on the floor. Then, he paused and turned back to them. "Congratulations on your win, Damon," he said with a small smile. He continued on his way, leaving Damon and Edward standing there. Damon watched Mr. Steele walk away, feeling a load of emotions. He was excited to meet with Mr. Steele, but he was also nervous. Chapter 80, Elixir Shop. They both finished their showers pretty quickly. Especially Damon, he was just happy to win and wanted to hear what Mr. Steele would say. He dried himself off, putting on clean clothes. As he got out of the shower room, Edward was already waiting outside, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. Damon walked towards him, his feet making a soft sound on the floor. Edward looked up, his eyes meeting Damon's. Damon smiled, still feeling the excitement of his win. Edward nodded, a small smile on his face. "You ready?" Edward asked, pushing himself off the wall. "Yeah, let's go," Damon replied, his heart beating slightly faster with anticipation. They walked to the office, and it didn't take long since both of them knew its location. The office was just down the hall from the fight arena, and they had passed by it many times before. Arriving there, Damon sat down on the chair next to the door, adjusting his position to get comfortable. "You can go in," he said. "He wanted to talk to you first," Damon said to Edward, nodding towards the door. Edward nodded back, pushing the door open and stepping inside. Damon didn't stay just because Mr. Steele said so, but he also wanted to check out his system interface first. He had been waiting for this moment since he got the quest, and he couldn't wait to see the reward he had earned. After all, he had just completed a quest, and it was time to check his reward. He grinned to himself. This was going to be a game changer. Before doing anything, he checked if there were any cameras in the room. He didn't want to be seen pressing or looking at an invisible screen. He glanced around the room, his eyes scanning the walls and ceiling. Luckily, no cameras were present. The hallway was empty and quiet. With that out of the way, Damon focused on his system interface. He opened the quest tab, and the notifications kept pouring in, echoing in his mind. "Congratulations on completing the quest and winning your 3 fights reward. Access to the Elixir Shop." He smiled. His physical stats had been stuck on F+, and he had no way to improve his mentality. He saw that the elixirs had ranks, so he pressed on 1 to see the details. This also gave him a broad view of how many ranks there were. It was from F to S, and it seemed he still had a long way to go. He thought about his favorite fighters from UFA and wondered where they would be if he were to measure them with this power system. He moved on, and it seemed each rank had its own price. He saw the S rank, and his mind lagged a bit, stuttering. He couldn't even think of the number. It was too high. He moved on, scrolling down, and found health elixirs. Can I cure cancer now? He saw that the health elixirs didn't have ranks, but they focused on different injuries that could happen in each body part. They weren't exactly expensive, but most of them were for small injuries. He was sure that if he kept scrolling, he would find crazy numbers. And so he did. Damon's eyes widened as he scrolled through the list. He saw elixirs for broken bones, muscle strains, and even internal injuries. Each one had a specific price, and he wondered how much it would cost to heal a serious injury. He kept scrolling, his eyes scanning the list quickly. He saw elixirs for poison, burns, and even mental health. It seemed like the elixir shop had everything he needed to stay healthy and strong. Damon closed the system, looking up, and things were definitely looking up as well. As he thought, he heard the door to the office open, and he saw Edward coming out with a determined look on his face. Edward didn't look like he had before, when he seemed like he had lost hope. Instead, he looked like he had just received some good news. Edward said goodbye to Damon and left, walking down the hallway with steps that'll make you think he was the one who won the match tonight. Damon watched him go, wondering what had happened in the office to change Edward's demeanor so drastically. Then, Damon heard Mr. Steele's voice calling out to him. "Damon, come in please," he said. Damon stood up, taking a deep breath to calm his nerves. He walked over to the office door and pushed it open, stepping inside and closing the door shut behind him. Shut. Chapter 81. Call me Victor. Instead, Damon closed the door behind him, taking a deep breath as he turned around to face Mr. Steele. He had expected to see the usual serious expression, with Mr. Steele's hands gesturing emphatically as he spoke, and a cold, piercing gaze that seemed to bore into his soul. But instead, he was met with a wide, warm smile that seemed to light up the entire room. Mr. Steele stood up from his chair, sliding it back as he rose, and made his way towards Damon. He stretched out his arms, and Damon, caught off guard, hesitated for a moment before taking them. He was pulled into a firm, hearty hug, with Mr. Steele's arms wrapping tightly around him. "Congratulations, kid," Mr. Steele said, his voice filled with genuine warmth and enthusiasm. Damon was taken aback by the sudden display of affection, but he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and accomplishment. He had worked hard to earn this moment, and it felt amazing to have someone acknowledge his efforts. As they hugged, Damon could feel the tension in his body begin to ease, replaced by a sense of relief and excitement. He had been wondering what Mr. Steele wanted to discuss, and now he was beginning to think that it might be something good. Obviously, Mr. Steele pulled back, still smiling, and clapped Damon on the back. "You've done incredibly well, Damon," he said, his eyes shining with pride. "I think it's time we talked about your future." Mr. Steele looked at Damon with a serious expression, his eyes locked on his. "So, I promised a lot of benefits to you, and you held your side high, fought hard, and won," he said, his voice filled with a sense of pride and satisfaction. "Call me Victor. From now on we work together towards a common goal," Mr. Steele said, his eyes shining with a warm smile. Damon nodded, feeling a sense of relief and excitement. He had never felt so supported and encouraged in his life. "Thank you, Victor," Damon said, his voice filled with sincerity. "I'll make sure I don't disappoint you." He looked down at the envelope. He knew that this was just the beginning of his journey, and it would not end until he reached S rank. Victor smiled, seeming to sense Damon's determination. "I know you won't, Damon," he said, his voice filled with confidence. "You have the heart of a champion, and I'm excited to see you grow and develop as a fighter." He paused, his eyes locked on Damon's. "Now, take some time to review the documents in the envelope. We'll discuss the details of your contract and the plans for your future in the Steel team." Damon asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. "Steel team?" Victor chuckled, a warm, rich sound that filled the room. "Bad, right, it's a work in progress, still could change," he said, his eyes twinkling with amusement. Damon smiled, feeling a sense of relief that Victor was approachable and down to earth. Victor smiled, "Go on now, I'm sure your mother will be proud of you. Also, there's a drafted contract inside, see if you like the terms." If not, we'll discuss it. You'll find a reward inside for your win. Damon nodded, holding the envelope tight as if it contained a precious treasure, and it did. Thank you again, Mr. Steele, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. He turned to leave, and quickly shut the door behind him. On the other side of the door, Victor called out, "Just call me Victor, man. Now I feel old." He chuckled, shaking his head, and leaned back in his chair, a relaxed, contented expression on his face. As he sat there, he mumbled to himself, "Oh, kid, I hope you're able to do it." The words were spoken softly, almost to himself, but they held a hint of uncertainty and concern. Despite this, Victor couldn't help but feel a sense of confidence and hope. Maybe, just maybe, this kid was the last chance he had been waiting for. Chapter 82, Matthew, your biggest fan. Damon made his way out of the office, a wide smile still plastered on his face. He stood there for a moment, savoring the feeling of excitement and anticipation. He looked down at the envelope in his hand, his fingers itching to open it and examine its contents. But he resisted the temptation. He wanted to share this moment with his mother, the person who had been with him throughout his journey, even before he picked up fighting. He thought back to all the times his mother had supported him, encouraged him, and pushed him to be his best self. He remembered the early morning training sessions. His mother would join him when training, even though she stopped due to now working. Damon didn't and would never forget. Damon's heart swelled with love and gratitude as he thought about sharing this news with his mother. He couldn't wait to see the look of pride and joy on her face. He imagined her tears of happiness, her warm hugs, and her words of encouragement. Nothing beat the feeling of sharing happiness with his mother. He took a deep breath, feeling a sense of contentment wash over him. He knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in his life. He couldn't wait to see his career skyrocket. Think he was overconfident. Talk to his fist. Damon went to the room assigned to him. He walked over to the corner, where his backpack was leaning against the wall. He picked it up, feeling the familiar weight of his gear inside. The backpack was a practical solution for carrying his equipment, but he knew it wouldn't be enough for their upcoming move to LA. As he zipped up the backpack, Damon thought about the logistics of their move. They would need more bags, suitcases, or boxes to pack their clothes and belongings. The other was a grown man, tall and imposing, with a serious expression on his face. Damon's curiosity was piqued, wondering who these two were and what they wanted. He suddenly saw the kid run towards him, his little legs moving as fast as they could. The man chasing after him, calling out, "Matthew, wait." But the kid didn't stop until he reached Damon. He looked up at him with admiration, his eyes shining with excitement. "Damon Cross, I'm your biggest fan. Dad says you're going places. I think you're the greatest. I wanna be like you one day." The kid began rambling, his words tumbling out in a rush. Damon froze, not knowing what to say. This was his first encounter with a fan, and he was taken aback by the kid's enthusiasm. He looked up at the boy's father, who was scratching his head, a mixture of embarrassment and amusement on his face. "Sorry, man," he said, looking at the boy. "Matthew, I told you to be polite." Although his voice was reprimanding, it was soft, and Damon could tell he wasn't really mad at the kid. Damon shook his head, smiling. "It's fine," he said, looking at the kid. He went down on one knee, so he could be at eye level with Matthew. "I'm happy to have a big fan like you, Matthew." Matthew's eyes lit up even more, and he asked, his voice full of excitement, "Really? Can I get your autograph?" Damon was about to say he didn't have a pen, but like magic, the boy had one in a paper. Damon took the paper, and paused, feeling a little rusty. It had been a long time since he held a pen, and he wondered what his signature autograph should be. He smiled, thinking about it for a moment. His hand moved, writing, "Damon," in a cursive style, and he scratched it with a cross, signifying Damon Cross. The kid took the autograph, his eyes shining with joy. Thank you so much," he exclaimed, hugging the paper to his chest. The dad said goodbye, and Damon watched as they walked away, the kid still bubbling with excitement. Damon couldn't help but feel a sense of gratefulness and happiness. He had made a difference in someone's life, and that felt amazing. But despite that happiness, looking at the backs of the father and son, he couldn't help but feel. Just maybe if things had been different. Chapter 83. A bond that could never broken. Damon arrived pretty quickly at the motel. Maybe he was too happy to notice the distance. The taxi ride had flown by in a blur, and before he knew it, he was standing outside the motel, paying the fare. As he handed over the money, he couldn't help but think back to that kid, Matthew. The little boy's words of admiration had left a warm feeling in his chest, and he couldn't help but smile as he remembered the encounter. It felt good to have someone tell you you're great, even if it was a child. But somehow, it felt even more meaningful coming from a kid. Maybe it was because children were always honest, or maybe it was because they looked up to you with such wide eyes and innocent faces. But as he walked towards the motel room, he also felt a sense of obligation creeping in. He couldn't let that kid down, not now that he had been told he was someone's hero. He couldn't let Mr. Steele down, not after all the faith he had placed in him or the investment he would make. He couldn't let his mother down, not after all they had been through together. And last but not least, he couldn't let himself down. The pressure was mounting, and Damon could feel the weight of expectation settling on his shoulders. His own expectations. He took a deep breath, trying to shake off the feeling of responsibility. He loved what he was doing, and he didn't want to look at it as an obligation or a burden. He wanted to enjoy the journey, to savor the moments of victory, and learn from the moments of defeat. He was about to open the door, but paused on the handle. His mind suddenly flashed back to Mr. Steele's question, "Why do you fight?" He had tried to answer, saying that he wanted to provide for his family, but Mr. Steele hadn't accepted that answer. Now, standing outside his motel room, Damon felt like he had finally found the truth. He thought about the rush of adrenaline he felt when he stepped into the cage, the roar of the crowd, the thrill of victory. He thought about the sweat, the blood, the tears. He had never shared his fighting experiences with anyone before, not like this. Joey had gone to LA, and he didn't have friends to talk to about his fights. He had always kept his emotions and thoughts locked away, but now, with his mother, he felt like he could finally open up. His mother asked questions: what was going through your mind in the second round? Or, how did you feel when the judges announced your win? Damon rolled his eyes, a playful smile spreading across his face. Well, Mom, you're starting to sound like a reporter now, he teased, chuckling at his mom's enthusiastic questioning. Aoife laughed, her eyes sparkling with amusement. Well, you're going to be talking to them in the future, so I'm prepping you, she joked, winking at her son. You know, so you don't stutter, she added, her voice filled with mock seriousness. Damon laughed, feeling a sense of comfort and familiarity with his mom's playful banter. Okay, Mom, he said, standing up from the table. He stretched his arms above his head, feeling a sense of relaxation wash over him. I need a shower, he announced, making his way towards the bathroom. I'll be right back, he called out, disappearing into the bathroom. Aoife nodded, watching her son disappear into the bathroom. She then looked at the door, a thoughtful expression on her face. Didn't you say you always shower at that place? She mumbled to herself, her brow furrowed in confusion. She shook her head and went back into cooking. As she finished cooking, Aoife leaned against the wall, her eyes gazing out the window. She thought about what she did today, and a small sigh escaped her lips. She had always been hesitant to talk about fights, to discuss the details of Damon's fights. The memories of her own past, the trauma she had endured, still lingered. But today was different. Today, she had felt a sense of joy, of connection with her son. She wanted to share such moments with Damon, to be a part of his life, to show him that she cared. Her trauma was a small sacrifice, she told herself, if it meant she could be there for her son. She knew Damon was growing, maturing, and soon he would be making his own way in the world. Who knew when he would find a beautiful girl, and they would run off to who knows where. She liked the idea of Damon starting her own life, so she wanted to enjoy the moments they had now. Chapter 84. The scars of the past. Damon stood in front of the mirror, his eyes scanning the reflection that stared back at him. His face was a mess of bruises, a testament to the intense fight he had just endured. Although he had said he was going to shower, he found himself drawn to the mirror, his impatience getting the better of him. He wanted to test the health elixir, to see if it would really work as promised. As he looked at his reflection, Damon's gaze drifted to the scars that covered his body. He slowly pulled off his shirt, the fabric sliding down his arms like a gentle caress. He turned his back against the mirror, his eyes fixed on the scar that ran from his shoulder to his lower back. It was a reminder of a painful past, a past that he tried to keep hidden. Damon's mind began to wander as he stared at the scar. He remembered the day he got it, the day his father's anger had boiled over. He was just a kid, no more than 8 years old, and he had made the mistake of making noise while his father was watching a fight. The memory still made him tremble with fear. He was a damn kid, no one deserved to be treated that way. His father's words still echoed in his mind, the sound of his voice like a slap in the face. "You little shit, can't you see I am busy? If **** loses and I lose my bet, I will kill you." Damon clenched his fist, his anger and frustration simmering just below the surface. As he stood there, frozen in the past, Damon's thoughts turned to the health elixir. He had been skeptical at first, but something about it drew him in. Maybe it was the promise of healing, of erasing the scars that covered his body. Maybe it was the hope of finding a way to escape the pain of his past. Whatever it was, Damon knew he had to try it. He couldn't shake the feeling that the health elixir was the key to unlocking a new chapter in his life. His face instantly contorted, turning bright red as the liquid hit his tongue. He wanted to spit it out. The taste was unbearable, like someone had poured a mixture of bitter herbs and sour milk down his throat. His face shriveled up, his eyes watering from the intense aftertaste. He felt a tingling sensation spreading through his body, like 1,000 tiny needles poking at his skin. Damon's eyes scanned his reflection in the mirror, but everything looked the same. His bruises were still there, his skin still marred by the marks of his recent fight. He turned around, checking his back, and his scar was still visible, trailing from his shoulder to his lower back. Damon took a deep breath, making a promise to himself. He wouldn't check his reflection again until 3 days had passed. He wouldn't look in the mirror, wouldn't obsess over the progress of the healing elixir. He wanted to be surprised, to wake up one morning and find that his bruises had vanished, his scar had faded. He wanted to feel the thrill of discovery, to experience the joy of healing without constantly monitoring his progress. With that, Damon turned off the shower he had turned on to convince his mother he was showering. He had only wet his hair a bit, just enough to make it look like he had taken a shower. He came out of the bathroom, the warm air of the motel room enveloping him like a gentle hug. His mother had outdone herself, as always. Aoife looked at Damon and smiled, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "Well, that was fast. Usually, you take longer. Can I assume that my cooking made you cheat on your shower?" She joked, her voice light and playful. Damon chuckled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. "Yep, it looks and smells amazing," he said, his stomach growling triggered by the smell. The aroma of roasted chicken and steamed vegetables filled the air, making his mouth water. Aoife laughed, pleased with herself. "I'm glad I could tempt you away from your shower," she said, serving Damon a generous portion of chicken and vegetables. Chapter 85. Shady contract template. As they finished up dinner, the warm glow of the table lamp casting a cozy ambiance over the motel room, Damon suddenly remembered the envelope Mr. Steele had given him. He had almost forgotten about it, but now his curiosity was piqued. He walked towards his bed, his footsteps were quiet over the carpet. "Mom, I have something to show you," he called out, excited to see what was in. Well, he already knew, but still. Aoife stopped what she was doing, her hands pausing midair as she turned to face Damon. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity, and she made her way to him. She sat down beside him on the bed, the mattress creaking softly beneath her weight. "What do you want to show me?" she asked with anticipation on her voice. Damon chuckled, a low, throaty sound, as he picked up the envelope from his bed. "I don't know, we're about to find out," he said, his eyes lighting with mischief. Aoife shook her head, a small smile playing on her lips, but she didn't mind the suspense. She waited patiently, her eyes fixed on the envelope, as Damon's fingers worked to open the seal. Damon's fingers carefully tore open the top of the envelope. He pulled out a thick stack of cash, the bills neatly bound together. Aoife's eyes widened in shock, and she let out a soft gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. Damon's face broke into a wide, toothy grin, his eyes sparkling with excitement. He placed the stack of cash on the bed, the bills rustling softly against each other. For now, he didn't care about counting it, he had more important things to share. He took a deep breath, his chest expanding as he filled his lungs with air. "Mom, I have something to tell you," he said, his voice filled with anticipation. He turned to face Aoife, his eyes locking onto hers. Aoife's expression was a mix of confusion and concern, her eyebrows furrowed in worry. "Is it bad news?" she asked, her voice tinged with a hint of fear. She placed a reassuring hand on Damon's back. Damon shook his head, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled. "No, actually, it's good news," he said, his words spilling out in a rush. "You remember the man I told you about, the one who said if I won my 3 fights, he would fund my career?" Aoife nodded, her eyes still clouded with skepticism. The contract stated that Damon's primary objective was to reach the Ultimate Fighting Association (UFA) and become the champion. That was it. No hidden agendas, no secret clauses. The contract seemed straightforward, almost too good to be true. Damon's skepticism grew as he read on, searching for any loopholes or tricks. One clause caught his attention, making him feel uneasy. It stated that he couldn't quit unless he suffered an injury or, more disturbingly, death. Of course this meant he can't quit before he became champion in the UFA. The thought sent a shiver down his spine, but he pushed it aside, focusing on the rest of the contract. As he continued to read, Damon couldn't find any hidden terms or conditions that would require him to share his earnings with Mr. Steele. The contract explicitly stated that Mr. Steele would cover all expenses until Damon started generating income. Damon's mind filled with questions, but the more he read, the more he became convinced that the contract was legitimate. He checked again, and again, scouring the pages for any fine print or cleverly worded clauses that might trip him up. But no matter how hard he looked, he couldn't find any tricks or loopholes. Damon's eyes narrowed as he continued to examine the template contract. He knew that this was only a draft, a precursor to the actual agreement. He recalled Mr. Steele's words, promising to call him soon to discuss the details. What if Mr. Steele had made changes to the contract? What if there were new terms or conditions that weren't included in this template? Damon's caution kicked in, and he made a mental note to himself not to sign anything until he was absolutely sure. He would wait for Mr. Steele's call, and then he would carefully review the actual contract. He would ask questions, seek clarification on any doubts, and ensure that he understood every clause and condition. Chapter 86. Scars. Never heal do they. Time seemed to fly by, and before they knew it, the day of their departure to LA was approaching fast. With their minds set on the new adventure, Damon and Aoife began to prepare for the big move. They started by making trips to the local thrift shops, scouring the aisles for sturdy bags to pack their clothes and belongings. With Damon's $1,000 cash in hand, they didn't have to worry about the expenses of their move. They could focus on finding the right bags and supplies to make their transition to LA as smooth as possible. Damon stood in the parking lot, his body wet with sweat after an intense workout and training session with the punching bag. He had taken the health elixir 3 days ago, and its effects were nothing short of miraculous. His body had recovered to its full 100% condition, erasing all traces of the brutal fight he had endured. As he caught his breath, Damon's mind wandered to his goal. He had made a promise to himself to avoid looking at his reflection for a while, to see the results of the elixir for himself. But it was proving to be a challenging task. Every time he walked past a window or a mirror, he felt an overwhelming urge to glance at his reflection. His mind seemed to be working against him, tempting him to take a peek. He remembered the countless times he had caught himself reaching for a mirror or window, only to stop himself just in time. It was as if his mind was playing a game of tug-of-war with his willpower. Damon's hands clenched into fists, and he took a deep breath, trying to calm thoughts. Okay, maybe he was exaggerating this matter. After all, it wasn't that he couldn't look at his face, but it was his back that he couldn't. The thought of seeing his reflection, of checking if the health elixir had truly worked its magic, was both exhilarating and terrifying. As he made his way to the motel room, he had expectations. He hoped the elixir had worked. Deep down, he already believed it did. Why wouldn't it? After all, it was supposed to heal scars and wounds. Damon's mind wandered back to the day he had taken the elixir. He remembered the sensation of his body beginning to heal, the pain and discomfort slowly fading away. As he gazed into the mirror, he saw a face that took his breath away. It was his child self staring back at him with a look of hope and innocence. The scars, the wounds, the imperfections, all gone. His skin was smooth, unblemished, and radiant. He looked like a completely different person, one who had never known the hardships and struggles he had endured. Damon's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. He felt like he was dreaming, like this was all some kind of cruel joke. He slid down to the floor, his back against the wall, and covered his eyes and ears, overwhelmed by the emotions flooding his body. He couldn't bear to look at himself anymore. Why hasn't it gone away? Why is it still there? The scar he had been so enthusiastic about removing, about erasing his past. It was still there, trailing from his shoulder to his back, all that hope he held. He had stayed with the scar for almost his life, so why was it bothering him now? Maybe it was the thought of never healing. Maybe seeing that scar made him realize he won't ever escape the past. It was a part of him. But why should he accept it? So much hope he held. It was the system playing a game with him. Maybe the reason he is devastated was because he knew if that scar remained, it would cast a shadow on his future. But what guaranteed that even after it was gone, his past couldn't haunt him? Scars never heal, do they? Chapter 87. The journey to the LA. Damon and Aoife sat in the back of a car, watching the scenery pass by as they made their way to LA. Aoife was very excited with this move, but Damon's demeanor didn't quite match the mood. He had been unusually quiet since they left, his eyes fixed on the window as he stared out at the passing landscape. Noticing her son's silence and reaching out to him, concern on her face, she gently placed her hand over his, her touch warm and reassuring. "Everything is going to be fine," she whispered softly. Damon's gaze shifted from the window to his mother's face, his eyes locking onto hers. He knew she didn't understand why he was brooding, but her words still had a calming effect on him. Her voice somehow soothed his thoughts. Aoife's hand remained on his, a steady presence that seemed to anchor him to the moment. As his thoughts untangled, he took a deep breath and felt the tension on his body ease. As he looked at his mother, Damon realized that he shouldn't let his brooding ruin this happy moment for them. They were embarking on a new adventure, one that promised a fresh start and a brighter future. His problems would have to wait. Damon's grip on his mother's hand tightened slightly, a silent thank you for her comfort and support. The contractual process was surprisingly smooth. The actual contract was identical to the template. He had even asked Mr. Steele what was the catch, but all he did was just smile and say nothing. This stumped Damon. Sign the contract and find out the catch later, or don't sign the contract and live to regret this chance. Sure, some would come, but still. Also, he didn't believe that there was no catch. He wasn't that naive. He had been living on the streets. Even if his life at that time wasn't that active, he had experienced that nothing was ever free. But he still chose to sign it. He would deal with the consequences later. Maybe he was reckless, careless, but what the heck? Take risks or stay on the ground. And that's how they ended up here, on their way to LA. Mr. Steele had mentioned that he would meet them there, but he hadn't provided any further details. As for Aoife, she had never traveled much in her life, growing up in a small town in Ireland. The hustle and bustle of LA was a shock to her system. They finally came to a stop in front of a sleek, tall building that seemed to stretch up to the sky. The exterior was a gleaming expanse of glass and steel, with a subtle sheen that caught the light. Damon's eyes widened as he took in the sight, feeling a sense of awe wash over him. This was a far cry from the humble motel they had stayed in back in Stockton. He remembered what he told his mother when they first moved to the motel. "It's not the Ritz, but we have a roof over our head." This was the damn Ritz. As he gazed up at the building, Damon couldn't help but think that everything had changed. This was the kind of place he had only dreamed of living in. The kind of place that seemed to whisper promises of luxury and comfort. He felt a thrill of excitement, mixed with a little trepidation. What would their new life be like in a place like this? A man in a black suit, Victor, was waiting for them outside, standing next to a sleek BMW. He smiled warmly as they approached, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Hello, you must be the mother of this boy here," he said, his voice low and smooth. He placed a hand on Damon's shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. Aoife looked a little nervous, her eyes darting between Victor and the building. Victor's rich demeanor was a little intimidating, but he seemed to sense her unease and smiled reassuringly. "Ah, yes, Mr. Steele," she began, but Victor cut her off. "None of that, call me Victor," he said, his eyes twinkling. "I'm sure we're the same age." He glanced at Damon, his expression warm. "How are you doing? Kid. Ready to see your new home. He patted Damon's shoulder, his hand lingering for a moment before he turned to lead them towards the building. Let's get in, shall we? He said, striding confidently towards the entrance. Damon followed, his eyes fixed on the building's towering height. Chapter 88. Meeting the team as they stepped into the apartment, Aoife and Damon were immediately struck by its beauty. The living room was spacious, with large windows that offered a stunning view of the city. The sunlight streaming in highlighted the modern decor, making the space feel warm and inviting. They spent the next hour exploring the apartment, checking out each room and marveling at the amenities. Aoife was busy unpacking their clothes, humming softly to herself as she worked. Meanwhile, Damon and Victor made their way to the kitchen, a room that left Damon speechless. The sleek countertops, the stainless steel appliances, and the ample storage space all combined to create a cooking space that was even more impressive than their old home in Limerick. Victor, noticing Damon's awe, smiled and poured himself a glass of water. Your mom is a very good person. You did a good job taking care of her, he said, his voice low and sincere. Damon's eyes snapped to Victor's face, and he saw a knowing smile that seemed to hold a hint of pity and sadness. His heart began to beat faster as he mumbled, you know. The question stayed long, and Victor looked away, his eyes avoiding Damon's. You and I are going to be working together, so I did my research, he said, his tone neutral. Don't worry, what I know will stay between us. I won't tell anyone. You can share it with others if you wish. Damon felt a wave of awkwardness wash over him. No one had ever known about his and his mother's past struggles. He didn't know how to react around Victor now. The man's words had created a sense of vulnerability, making Damon feel like he was standing on shaky ground. Victor, seeming to sense Damon's unease, scratched his beard thoughtfully. Okay, since you're settled in, how about I show you what I wanted to anyway? He asked, his tone lightening the mood. Damon nodded, still feeling a bit dazed. Sure, let me go tell Mom. She's alone, he said, disappearing into the other room. The sound of his footsteps sounded through the apartment, leaving Victor standing alone in the kitchen, his eyes gazing out the window at the city. Below, the car door of the sleek BMW closed with a soft thud, enveloping Damon in a luxurious atmosphere. Damon nodded, taking in the words of wisdom. He wondered what the most important part of the advice would be, and then he heard it. Listen closely, Victor said, his voice taking on a slightly more serious tone. Have fun. It's not a job, it's not school. Have fun, learn, make friends. There's no advice other than that. Have fun. The words seemed to sink in, and Damon felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He smiled, feeling a sense of freedom wash over him. As they pushed the door open, Damon's eyes widened in surprise. He had expected a typical office or lobby, but instead, he was greeted by the sounds of intense physical activity. The air was filled with the thuds of punches, grunts of effort, and the sharp bam of kicks. The noise was almost deafening, and Damon's heart rate quickened as he took in the scene before him. The large space stretched out, with 4 rings dominating the center of the room. Each ring was surrounded by a variety of machines, punching bags, and rubber dummies, all designed to test the skills and endurance of the trainees. The walls were lined with mirrors, allowing the athletes to monitor their technique and form. The floor was covered in mats, providing a soft and safe surface for grappling and ground work. Damon's gaze swept across the room, taking in the diverse group of people training. Some were sparring, their movements lightning fast as they exchanged blows. Others were working on their technique, practicing kicks and punches on the bags and dummies. A few were using the machines, their faces set in determination as they pushed themselves to their limits. Everyone was completely absorbed in their training, oblivious to the newcomers. Damon felt excited knowing he was going to be part of this intense and demanding world as he stood there, taking it all in. He had never seen anything like this before. The sheer scale and intensity of the training facility was overwhelming, and he couldn't help but wonder. Would he be able to keep up with these athletes? Chapter 89. Meeting the team Victor looked at Damon with a serious expression. Remember what I said? He asked, his voice firm but friendly. Damon nodded, recalling the advice Victor had given him just moments before. Have fun, he said, his voice confident. Victor smiled, seeming to approve of Damon's response. He stepped forward, his movements commanding attention. He clapped his hands together, the sharp sound echoing through the training facility. "Okay. Everyone, gather around," he called out, his voice loud and clear. The athletes stopped training, their movements ceasing as they turned to face Victor. They all had similar reactions, their faces breaking into smiles as they saw him. It was clear that they liked and respected Victor. Damon watched with interest as people began to gather around, their footsteps echoing off the walls. The room grew quieter as the athletes formed a semicircle around Victor. They stood with their arms crossed, their eyes fixed on him waiting to hear the announcement. Some of them glanced at Damon, their expressions curious. Damon felt a sense of nervousness, but Victor's presence seemed to calm him down. As the last athlete took their place, Victor began to speak. "Everyone, this is Damon," he said, his voice loud and clear. "He's our newest team member, and I want you all to make him feel welcome." The athletes nodded, their faces friendly. Victor scanned the group, his eyes lingering on each athlete before moving on to the next. "He'll be joining the mixed martial arts team. Okay. You all can go back to your training," he announced, his voice loud and clear. The athletes dispersed, returning to their training routines. Damon noticed that 4 people stayed back, their eyes fixed on him with interest. Victor looked at Damon and nodded. "Come on, let me introduce you," he said, gesturing to the 4 athletes. They looked him up and down, and Damon couldn't help but feel self-conscious. He did look like he needed to gain some weight. Ash's expression turned sarcastic. "Why are you hurting yourself?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Damon's nose wrinkled up in distaste. "Why do you smell like alcohol?" he shot back, his voice firm. Ash's face instantly changed, his eyes darting to the other 3 athletes. "Oh shit, do you think Vic noticed?" "Fuck," he muttered, his voice low and worried. Ashley chuckled at her brother's expense, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "Of course he did. You're probably going to have to make up for it," she teased, her voice light and playful. Ty just shrugged, his expression neutral, while Svetlana smiled, her eyes crinkling at the corners. The tension in the room dissipated, replaced by a feeling of friendliness. Damon felt a sense of relief, knowing that his new teammates were friendly and willing to joke around. He smiled, feeling a sense of belonging. Ty patted Ash on the back, pushing him forward slightly. "I told you Vic was coming back. Should have stopped partying," he said, his voice teasing. He looked at Damon and smiled. "Come on, while we wait for Vic, let's put you in for a spar, shall we?" he asked, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Svetlana spoke up for the first time, her voice smooth and fluent. "Who's he fighting?" she asked, her eyes scanning the group. Damon was surprised by her perfect English, given her foreign-sounding name. He had expected a thick accent, but her words were clear and crisp. The group looked at Ash, who raised his hands in protest. "Whoa, why me? I don't wanna hurt the guy," he said, clearly being sarcastic, "right?" Damon narrowed his eyes, feeling underestimated. He wanted to prove himself, show that he was more than just a skinny flyweight, otherwise they would always underestimate him. Ashley chuckled, her eyes sparkling with amusement. "Oh, come on, Ash, don't be a wimp," she teased, her voice light and playful. Ty grinned, his eyes lighting up in excitement. "Yeah, let's see what Damon's got." Chapter 90. A quick spar. They moved towards one of the cages. There were 2 cages, 2 boxing rings, and 4 rings in total. Luckily, one of the octagon cages was empty, and they made their way towards it. Damon noticed that Svetlana was missing, but he saw her coming back carrying a bunch of gear. She had a big smile on her face. Damon had never worn this type of gear before. Svetlana handed each of them a pair of gloves, a mouthguard, and a headgear. "Here, take this," she said, her voice firm but friendly. Damon took the gear and put it on, feeling a bit awkward. The headgear was bulky, and the gloves felt heavy. He looked at Ash, who was putting on his gear with ease. As they finished getting ready, they stepped into the cage. The door closed behind them, and they faced each other. The stare-down began, their eyes locked in a silent challenge. Some of the athletes training nearby saw the intense stare-down and wandered over to watch. A few of them leaned against the cage, their eyes fixed on Damon and Ash. Ty and Ashley stood next to each other, their faces eager with excitement. Svetlana stood on the other side of the cage, her eyes fixed on the 2 fighters. She was holding a timer and a towel, ready to intervene if needed. Damon felt his heart pounding in his chest. This was the first impression he had to put on a gold fight. Ash, on the other hand, looked confident, his eyes gleaming with a hint of arrogance. And then, without warning, Svetlana shouted, "Let's go." The timer started, and the spar began. Damon and Ash circled each other, their eyes locked in a fierce stare down. Svetlana helped Damon to his feet, his face pale and his eyes closed. The sparring match ended with Ash's clear dominance, leaving a tense atmosphere as the group reacted to the result. Damon's eyes fluttered open, and his vision was blurry. He saw a faint light and a beautiful face hovering above him. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming, and the face looked like an angel's. But as his senses returned, he realized it was Svetlana's face, her eyes filled with concern. Suddenly, he was jolted awake as cold water was poured on his face. He sat up with a start, his heart racing. Svetlana was kneeling beside him, a towel in her hand. Damon looked around, taking in his surroundings. He saw Ash standing nearby, looking guilty. Damon didn't want to seem weak or complain about losing the spar. He wanted to show that he could take a hit and bounce back. So, he opened his mouth, trying to sound casual. "Damn, did I fight Ty?" he asked, his voice a bit shaky. The group looked at him, not expecting him to be joking. They thought he might have a concussion or be disoriented. But as they saw the smile on his face, they smiled back, and chuckled. Ty, who was standing nearby, laughed and said, "Nah, man, you fought Ash. And he rocked your world." Ash looked relieved, his guilt dissipating. "Yeah, sorry about that, Damon. I didn't mean to hit you that hard." Damon waved his hand dismissively. "It's okay, I needed that. I've been getting too comfortable." Svetlana helped Damon to his feet, her hand on his elbow. "Let's get you checked out. Make sure you're okay," she said, her voice gentle. Damon nodded, still feeling a bit dizzy. But as he stood up, he felt good with his new teammates. As they walked out of the cage, Ashley patted Damon on the back. "Don't worry, we've all been there. Well, maybe not exactly there, but you know what I mean." Damon smiled, feeling a sense of belonging. "Yeah, I think I do." The group chuckled, and the tension was broken. Support the original author by checking out their book, links in the description.